On today's Switch to Linux, we're going to talk about setting up a Raspberry Pi, as somebody asked about this in the comments, and I realize I don't think I have at least a modern video on Raspberry Pis, getting started with them. So I want to go ahead and fill in that little gap here today. Thanks for checking out this video by Switch to Linux. If you like this type of content, subscribe to the channel if you've not already done so. Leave us a like and a comment down below. And yes, we are going to be talking about Raspberry Pis today. I realize not everybody wants to know much about Raspberry Pis. That's okay, but there are enough people that do, and I actually had a question on a video the other day asking about how to set up a Raspberry Pi. Do I have any videos on it? Well, I briefly explained the process there. I want to go ahead and get the video out. And so we're going to do this in two parts. We'll do this part here. I'm just going to do some basic introduction talking about it, and then we're actually going to walk you through the setup. So I'm going to switch over to another computer with that, and then we're going to go ahead and set up some operating system on this, and I'll figure out exactly which operating system that is in a little bit. But before, we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about differences between the Raspberry Pi and the traditional Linux distribution, and different considerations with setup and some different options that you have. First, you do need to make sure that you know a Raspberry Pi is a different type of processor than your standard computer. So you can't just grab a random Linux distribution and install it on a Pi. You have to have something that is built for a Raspberry Pi, or at least a generic ARM system. Of course, that's not going to help you if you're not a developer. So just find something that has an official Raspberry Pi image. Now, this one here we're going to use as a Raspberry Pi 4. I do have a Raspberry Pi 5, but it is in full production. I'm not pulling it off the wall. It is one of the Pis that is built into the wall of my mobile studio here. And that is my daily driver for doing my regular work that's not related to video content. And some video content preparation happens over there as well. But I do use a Raspberry Pi 5 as a standard computer workstation. And if I set somebody in front of that, they would not know it's a low power credit card size computer. Now, that's the 5, which is kind of the latest beast. The 4s are still pretty good. This was actually my old workstation before I replaced it with the Pi 5. This one I ran Manjaro for 4 years, perfectly fine as a web design and general use low power computer. So we're going to go ahead and install something on that one, since it's a spare Raspberry Pi floating around. So we'll go ahead and do a separate desk setup. I'll show you how I set that up and things like that when we get to that stage in the video. But I did want to mention first and foremost here that your Raspberry Pi images, when you download them, are usually IMG files. That is an image restore file, unlike your Linux distributions, which are typically packaged as ISOs. This means that some of your writing tools can write them and some of them cannot. I don't remember if Linux Mint's default tool can write IMG files. I don't think it can, but some of them might be able to. If you do have a situation where you have an IMG file and you just need to get it working, of course, the Pis by default run with SD cards in there. So we have our SD cards. And you can program them to run off of a USB port as well. And on my Raspberry Pi 5, I have the M2 hat running a M2 SSD off of that one. So there are a number of different ways you can boot this. I'm going to go ahead and just use the SD card because I have an abundance of them sitting around, and I'll just find a card that I can easily wipe. All right. So that is the first step. So if you don't have a USB writer, you can always use GNOME disks, because all you need to do in there is select your drive very carefully. Make sure you're not selecting the internal drive of your computer. Make sure you are selecting the external USB drive, or excuse me, the external SD card on the system that you want to install it to. Then you go up and you will select your restore image. You use that image file and you just restore that image. It's going to say, hey, the image file is smaller than the size of the card. That's perfectly fine. The reason is that a Raspberry Pi does not install in the typical way a Linux ISO will. It basically gets itself set up, and then on first power up, it will configure itself. It will utilize the remainder of the disk space as your basic space information. It'll set up all of the features depending on which distribution you happen to be using. Now, if you are looking for a tool, if you're going to be doing a lot with Raspberry Pis, I'd highly recommend you grab the Raspberry Pi Imager software. And This is available. You can get information about it at raspberrypi.com/software. And you can hit the download here. This is an app image, so it should work on most systems. On many of your Debian-based systems, you can just install it with RPI-Imager, utilizing your terminal, or likewise find it in your software repository. You can download it for Windows or Mac as well. Now, the Imager software, we're going to walk through that on the other computer, so I'm not going to say much about it here. But if you want to, if you're just kind of experimenting around, you can use this to download several Linux distributions directly for the Raspberry Pi, like the flagship, which is, of course, Raspberry Pi OS, a build specifically for the Raspberry Pi, which is based on Debian. This is a very good option. It does come in 32 and 64-bit options, and you do want to make sure that you grab whatever you want. Now, I will say this. When you are downloading a Pi image, it might be you might find some that are specific to versions of the Pi. Usually, if something is available for 4, it generally works with 5 as well, but you are going to want to confirm that. If you go with something like Pi 2, not going to be compatible with modern Pis. So you'll see that this Raspberry Pi OS is compatible all the way from the 3B, the 02, basically all of the various Pi options that we have that are your modern Pi versions. Now we have the Raspberry Pi OS, the Raspberry Pi Full. So the Pi OS has a desktop and some basic tools. The Raspberry Pi Full is a lot of extra tools, a lot of development tools. I believe this one might still have the Microsoft repositories because it has some Microsoft stuff in there. You can do the Lite, which has no desktop environment. If you're doing a Raspberry Pi for a server, the Lite makes the best overall choice. This is the 32-bit version. This is compatible with all Pi models. This is a legacy one, 64-bit. This one is a port of Debian Bookworm. And here's the Pi OS 32. And this one here, let's see, Pi Desktop. Oh, I didn't even know they had a desktop version for PC and Mac. Okay, that's neat. If you want to experiment with it, I guess. Now, you can grab things like if you want to install Ubuntu, you get Ubuntu directly through the Pi imaging software, and we will show you that. Basically, you can use this to download a variety of different things. In other words, if you're just going to experiment with Ubuntu or Raspberry Pi OS, you don't even need to download anything. Just set up the Pi Imager. It will download it for you and write it directly to your card. It does have more than those. There are a ton of different options in there, of which I do not know what they are off the top of my head, which is why I'm going to show you those on the actual computer. As far as me, I'm currently running MX Linux on mine. So if you go to the MX Linux download page, down here they have the respin option. You'll notice this is compatible with the Pi 4, Pi 400, and the Pi 5. And I'm running this on my Pi 5, and I absolutely love my MX Linux on the Raspberry Pi. It works great. Armbian is another popular one. This one that will take you some time to find the correct download. Armbian is really designed to fit every form of ARM processor board, so there's stuff in there I've never heard of. But you can go down here and grab the latest version, and it will tell you here which are the versions of the Pi this is compatible with at the bottom. And so you can grab those, and they have a let's see, they have the 2511, and what are the differences between these two? I have no idea. All right, it looks actually like stable user space packages. It looks like that's the exact same thing listed twice. Okay, I have no idea. I forgot to pull up Manjaro. I did run when this was my main station. I ran Manjaro on this one. And so Manjaro works great as well. I chose Manjaro back in the day when I first set this system up about 6 years ago. I've been running the Raspberry Pi as my main web development computer. I chose Manjaro at that time because at that time it was the only distribution I found that everything worked. Sound and internet and wireless and everything else, everything worked on Manjaro. Since then, there's been a lot of development, and every distribution I've thrown at it has worked just fine. So be aware of that. But with that, we're going to go ahead and jump over to the other computer. We're going to walk through the imager. We'll get something installed on the SD card, and then we will actually go to my desktop here, and I will show you this guy in action on a very nice portable screen that we picked up at a pawn shop somewhere. So we'll jump on over to the computer now. So we need to start by installing the Raspberry Pi imager. So we're going to do a sudo apt install rpi-imager, if I can spell imager right. There we are, that should be right. Enter your password, and I didn't get that right either. There we are. So now it's going to go ahead and install that just out of the repository. Now there is a newer version of this. I'm not sure exactly which version is the new one, and if this is the brand new or not. This is Linux Mint 22.2, I think. So it is current now, so we'll see. So let's just go ahead and imager right here. So this is the Raspberry Pi imager. Let's go ahead and just clear that screen out just so it's not super distracting there. Or I could just do that, I guess. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to pop my SD card in. This is just my old test build of Armbian, which I ended up not using. So we'll just go ahead and close that out. You know what? Let's go ahead and just show you really quick what this is going to kind of look like on the card. So you'll have a root folder, and then you'll have this config folder. So that's kind of what the card's going to look like when it's done. So we're going to start by choosing the device that we have. So now, of course, I'm running the Pi 5 for my main workstation, but the one we're actually going to be installing on is a Pi 4. You can see here that I can show everything, or I can go ahead and just select the various Pis available, and you'll see it has everything. I still have 2 functioning Raspberry Pi 2s and an old Pi 0, but we're going to start with our Pi 4. Now we're going to choose our operating system. Now this is if you have downloaded an IMG file, like maybe the MX or Manjaro or Armbian, you can go ahead and just select it right here and just select whatever your image file has to be. Oh, look, I got a Tails one. I don't know if that's going to work, but here I can choose one of the main Raspberry Pi OS builds. And honestly, I do kind of like the Raspberry Pi OS if you're not looking for anything really special. It does work very, very well. It actually looks pretty good. I just kind of like some of the other tools and things that we get with like MX Linux and things. Here's other Raspberry Pi ones. Now also in here there's just a lot of other different fun stuff. So here's different operating systems. So you can do Ubuntu, Apertus, never seen that one before. Here's RISC OS, Ultramarine, Alpine Linux. Is it bass or bass? What is this? I'm not sure. Is that bass or bass? That's one of those words, right? There's Armbian. That's one I talked about. Here's a highly optimized minimal Debian OS, Diet Pi. You can also go in and there's a number of different things. So here's media players, OSMC. This is the one I'm currently running on my Pi that runs a Kodi server. However, if I were rebuilding it now, I'd probably do LibreElec. And then there's a few other players in there you can play around with also. Here's emulation. So this is a Recal box, so retro gaming options. Here's other specific purposes, just a number of different things. Here's some 3D printing. There's a Kali Linux, just a number of different stuff. Here's your home automation type stuff. So here's your Home Assistant. If you're looking to build a Home Assistant, you can just install it right here. So these are just going to download whatever I want directly here. Here's freemium and paid. Here's some 3D printing stuff. And digital signage operating systems. That's neat. Look at that. All right, and let's go with, you can erase the card, you can use their custom. This is the one that you do if you want to be updating the firmware on your Pi. And I've done that before. You need to do that if you want to enable like USB stuff. So it doesn't really matter which one of these we happen to choose. They are all effectively they're all going to set up the exact same way. We just image it and then we just drop the card in. I want to see what I have that's not going to be a massive size here, so I'll figure that out. Well, I don't want a server. I want to get something more fascinating than that. I'm going to go ahead and run with the Diet Pi because it is the smallest. I have no idea anything about this one. Let's see. Actually, no. Well, yeah, I can, because this does 4. I cannot do this one on 5, but since we're setting this up on 4, we're going to go ahead and do that. And then now we choose our storage, and it will, by default, only give us the removable storage. Just be extra sure. So in this case, I am going to be using that. So you go ahead and hit next. It's going to give you a warning that you're going to erase all data. So yes, that's perfectly fine. And now we're going to need to enter our password. So now what it's going to do is it's going to download it, and then it's going to proceed to write it. And then once it's written, then we'll get a final confirmation. I'll come back to the video when it is done writing. All right, so it's written. Now it's doing a final verification. This is basically your, verifying your download step. So it's all built into the application itself. Okay, so it is now written. We can just go ahead and remove the card and then insert this into the Raspberry Pi, boot it up, and you will be good to go. Having a look at the last one we downloaded and installed that just wasn't a particularly good or user-friendly or common Pi image. So I wanted to go ahead and show you a much more common experience. And I looked through my archives, and since this isn't a production machine, I realized I had downloaded MX Linux only about 1.5 years ago. And so we're going to go ahead and show you how to write that one. So same thing, we're going to go in, we're going to choose our device. So this one here is the Pi 4. And then now what we're going to do is I'm going to go down to custom. So this is if you download an IMG file. You see I have an MX Linux 23.2 Raspberry Pi image. And if you'll remember from the website, this one is compatible with the Pi 5, which is what I installed it on, and also the Pi 4. Now this is not the current version of MX Linux. I do want to make that very clear. You'll see I've downloaded it about 1 year ago. And that really is because that's about when I started putting together the Pi 5. And so we're going to go ahead and click this one. And then now we're going to choose our storage. Once again, now we're going to our SD card. Now on these, what you will see next on many of these you download, so this applies to the MX Linux, it will apply to the Ubuntu. You can go ahead and you can edit some settings. Now, if you'll remember, the default settings on your Raspberry Pi will give you, they'll give you a number of different options. The default on the Pi is like Pi with, I think the username is also Pi, something like that. And then of course the keyboard is British English. So what this allows us to do is write a file to the SD card as it is being imaged, which is going to override your username and your password and things like that. So what I can do is now I can use the default, or I can set a default here. I'll just go ahead and do this, and let's just go ahead and give it a password. So this is going to replace that particular password as it goes. Now I can configure a LAN. So in this case here, it detects that this computer has a wireless connection to my current network. So I can just go ahead and configure this so that now I don't even have to set up your configuration. And then the next one is your locale settings. So if you'll remember that Raspberry Pi likes defaulting to British English and things like that. So I can go in here and we can set our keyboard to what we want. I can also go in and I can do things like enable SSH, or I can, these are just things, we're going to disable telemetry, these are things related to the imager itself. So that, I wish that were dechecked by default, but it is not. So we'll go ahead and hit our save. And then if you hit no clear settings, it'll wipe everything out. But here, would you like to apply your customizations? Now we're going to say yes, and then it's going to erase all information on the drive. You're going to have to enter your administrative password. And now it's going to write that file. And then once we have this file written, we're going to go ahead and do the next step of actually setting up the Pi with this, because it is a much more traditional experience as opposed to that Diet Pi that we tried. But I realized I was going to keep that in the video because it does show you how to function with the thing with downloading an operating system directly to it. In this case, we've downloaded it prior and we're just choosing to write custom. We have a nice Raspberry Pi setup over here. So I have a nice DC monitor. Good catch there. I have a nice DC monitor over here that's plugged in up here. So go ahead and give that guy some power. And then I have a nice little power adapter here that ties directly into a 12-volt line that's plugged into a accessory line that I have. And we're going to plug this guy into the Pi. This has a Raspberry Pi 4 adapter. Now this one is a 15 watt, which is rated for Raspberry Pi 4. Don't forget, Raspberry Pi 5 requires 25 watts, not 15. So make sure that you do that if you are getting Pi stuff. You need that extra power supply. Now I had to buy an extra one just for that. So we're going to go ahead and plug this guy in, and then this will boot up MX Linux for the first time. I got a little mini keyboard here we're going to use. We get our MX Linux startup logo. Now, the first time you boot into it, it's going to resize the partitions and it's going to reboot itself. So that's why it's rebooting itself now. And now we have the MX Linux startup here. Go ahead and recapture my mouse. So here's our keyboard layout, US English. You can change your keyboard settings if you want. Our next button, here's our computer name. And then we can do our system times. We can see what services are enabled. We can alter those if we want to alter those services. And now we're going to set up here a username. And we're going to keep the root unchecked. So that will make our default user count as a sudo user here. Now it's going to reboot one more time. And here we are on our login screen. Okay, so now we have booted in and we are now running MX Linux, and we're not going to go any further than that. This is just your basic MX Linux. And in this case here, you can see we got a notification that it wants us to connect. So I'm going to talk about that in just a brief moment. All right, so we did the initial setup there looking at putting in our information there, and that was giving me an issue on boot up. And so there's two potential factors here. The first is that pre-configuration might only be compatible with the Pi 5, not the Pi 4. That is a possibility. The second possibility is I noticed I kept getting into that boot loop and I kept getting that screen a couple times. So I went back and checked the SD card, and the SD card wasn't working at that point in time. So I'm wondering if maybe I bumped the Pi or did something that messed up the SD card. So all of the pre-configurations we put in, either those aren't compatible with the 4 and it was causing configuration issues, or more likely the SD card kind of went bad in the middle of that. So I actually changed my SD card for the final part of the video. But just to illustrate, sometimes we need to troubleshoot a few things. If you go through and write the system and it won't work properly on the Pi 4, go back and rewrite the card without bringing any configurations in with it and let the system itself configure it. You're going to have a little bit different experience in each one. But hey, that's one of the great things about Linux is you can get in here and you can experiment with a lot of different things. I mean, this here, we're doing a desktop experience on this little micro keyboard on a Raspberry Pi 4 and a DC powered 1080p monitor, which actually has volume and built in, and has speakers built in. So like this is like, I'm right now in an off-grid setting. This whole setup right here, I want to say the Pi's a max of, we're talking max of 15 watts. Usually it averages closer to about a 5 watt in usage in my experiments. And I don't know exactly what the screen takes, but I can't imagine it's more than about 5 watts. This whole system is 10 watts. And I don't know about the 4. I know the Pi 5, I can watch YouTube videos on that. I can do a lot of things. I use it for regular web design, which includes some graphic design things. I do all that. I would not try video editing on the Pi 5, but this Pi 4, this was my actual workstation. This exact Pi 4 was my workstation for 4 years in this off-grid setting. I think I did 5 years. I did a year before moving into the off-grid setting. And so uh, that's how easy it is, though, to set up a Pi. Always, like all things Linux, there might be a little bit of tinkering around, but that Pi imager, download your images or download them directly from the Pi, like that Diet Pi we started with. It worked. It was just a complicated system. It was not something I would want to do on an intro to Pi videos like this one here. But there is our basic setup and our configuration. If I can find links to all of the stuff I have here, I'll put them in the description as well if you are interested in getting stuff like a micro keyboard. And you can get these Bluetooth or wireless, and this one's just a basic wireless. I don't like the Bluetooth stuff unless I have to. The screen we actually found at I think it was in an Amazon return store or something like that. So I'm not sure if it was returned or something else. It smelled like really bad, like cigarette smoke. It's been a couple years. We got the cigarette smoke out of it, and everything else is just simple cables and ports and stuff like that. So let me know your thoughts about all this in the comments down below.